officials and organisations. They met today in Brussels amid growing concern over Tehran's nuclear programme and the storming of the British embassy. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Lisa Holland reports.
Today was all about a diplomatic show of force against Iran. Britain's Foreign Secretary met other foreign ministers in Brussels. It's the European club working out what to do next. They extended the list of Iranian people and companies cut off from doing business with the EU and agreed to discuss new sanctions on finance, transport and energy.
There was a discussion about what has happened in the British embassy in Tehran, and as one of my colleagues put it, the consideration that an attack on one member state is in a sense an attack on all.
But the sanctions weren't making headline news on Iranian state TV.
There has been some disturbances that have occurred outside the Iranian embassy in London. The ministry has said Iran's missions are being targeted in an organized campaign.
In reality, this was the scene outside the Iranian embassy in London. All was peaceful except for the knock of the postman. It seems the Iranians are shooting the messenger, playing games with the British government after it ordered Iran's diplomats to leave the country by Friday. The latest brinkmanship has been triggered by the ransacking of the British embassy in Tehran. Britain accuses the Iranian government of orchestrating the demonstrations and has now closed the embassy. This was a human shield outside one of Iran's nuclear facilities 2 weeks ago. Iranians are being warned of a possible military attack by Israel. The sabre rattling is getting louder. Britain insists airstrikes are not on the table, but an ex-Israeli intelligence chief has told Sky News a unilateral move is not out of the question.
My personal assessment is that those efforts will not stop the Iranians from achieving the bomb. And at the end, a military attack will have to be taken. If worse comes to worse, and the world will sit idle and will do nothing, Israel will exert its legitimate right for self-defense.
Within 24 hours, the Iranians won't be opening the door to anyone. They have to leave Britain by Friday, taking with them the diminishing chances of diplomatic dialogue. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
Ministers on 39 people and 141 companies. But we've heard of sanctions many times before. Are these going to have an effect?
We have to wait and see what the details of these companies are, but I am presuming that they would be targeted against most of the companies that are in direct contact with the Revolutionary Guards, because the Revolutionary Guards in Iran runs the economy, as it were. And if that is the case, that would be targeting exactly the right place. And also the banking sector that was targeted by Britain and the rest of the Western world just in the recent round of sanctions was the right target, because it targets the highest level of government in Iran, which are the group that are responsible for human rights violations and for a lot of other action that is not suited.
The Iranian regime would say that actually it really just affects the people.
It doesn't actually, I mean, because this is targeting exactly those companies and those personalities who are involved with the Revolutionary Guards and the office of the leader, etc., etc.
So you really think it will get to the heart of the regime?
And yes, we mustn't forget that it's not just the economic effect, it's the political effects that it's having, and we are seeing lots of signs of that. One sign is that President Ahmadinejad has been coming out in the parliament complaining about the sanctions, saying they are biting us right, left and centre, and they are monitoring us, they are monitoring our trade, they're restricting our trade, they are making our lives difficult. Then we had the vote in the parliament, which was directly retaliation against the British sanctions. Then we also have the divisions that these sanctions have caused within the leadership echelons of the Iranian political structure. That is really key. Conservatives that are now ruling Iran have divided into 18 different groups, and that is why there is confusion over who's saying what. Do they approve of these actions or do they not? But I must make a point about what William Hague said, that he said that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would be different to the rest. I would tend to say that In fact, Ministry of Foreign Affairs is controlled, foreign policy is controlled by the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. We have not heard one word from Ayatollah Khamenei. He could have said one sentence that these are illegal actions and they should be stopped. But
can I ask you about oil, because there has been no consensus today on imposing an embargo on Iranian oil. Do you think that's a mistake?
No, I don't think so, because I think embargo on oil would have had backlashes for Western countries, because the price of oil would have gone up and Iran would have caused obstructions, and that would have caused more trouble than would have been worth. So I think the sanctions, as far as I can see without having seen the details, I think they are targeting the right areas.
Dr. Massime Torfe, thanks very much.
Obviously, there will be an increase in sanctions. Still, the international community, and specifically Europe, have many more tools in their disposal. There is there will probably be a statement from Europe about supporting of a British position. I think there's also the question of an extradition of a former Iranian diplomat, ambassador to Spain, who has been under house arrest since 2006 here and is wanted by the United States for information on setting up of terrorist camps, terrorist cells in the Middle East, and providing logistical support to them. Definitely, I think there's also another clock ticking, and that is in Iran. What is happening in Iran at the moment is a confrontation between two specific axes that I would call, number one, Mr. Ahmadinejad, and what the regime itself calls the deviant axis that is in charge of the government. And then you've got the other one that is sits in the parliament and also has the mayorship of Tehran. That is Mr. Zorgad and Mr. Ghalibaf and Mr. Larijani. How the Supreme Leader will allow these forces to ride on the waves of the support of their hardline supporters would basically define what is going to happen next. In short, I think the ball is also in the court of Tehran, and how the Iranian government, it has actually suffered diplomatically. You can say diplomatically is bankrupt, and internationally as well, from both in Europe and in the region. And so how are they going to react, and how are they going to set up the morale, boost the morale of their own followers in home?
Doesn't it? It puts Western leaders in a bit of a bind, doesn't it? Because on the one hand, they do not want to improve the hand and bolster the position of Mr. Ahmadinejad. They'd prefer to help reformers and liberals if they possibly can. But they know they have to be seen to be doing something. When somebody orders the storming of an embassy, you can't just sit back and take it.
But it's very important to note that this time, although Mr. Ahmadinejad in previous instances was the standard bearer of this very hardline wing in the Islamic regime, in the state, right now it is no longer, they're not at his control. Actually, it is Mr. Khamenei who has the power, and Mr. Larijani and Mr. Ghalibaf are riding it. So in effect, Mr. Ahmadinejad has become a moderate, and suddenly the parliament and the mayorship of Iran have become the hardliners. One thing, definitely, I think one thing we should follow is how is the British government going to deal with the representative of the Supreme Leader in London, who is his direct appointee, and that's the Ayatollah who sits in the Maid of Vale Mosque. He is actually in charge of Ayatollah Khamenei's office in the UK. So what will his position be? We heard that the diplomats have been given 48 hours to leave London. The consulate is still working. Up until noon it was working. But we have to see what will happen to the state of the Ayatollah Khamenei's office in London.
OK, Nazanin Ansari, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for giving us a perspective on what's happening in Tehran right now. Not often we hear Mahmoud Ahmadinejad described as a reformer or a liberal. Interesting perspective.
The Iranians will now retaliate against Europe, and you end up with the dialogue of the deaf, where there'll be absolutely no communication whatsoever between the Iranian side and the European side. at a time when Iran's nuclear program is obviously at the forefront of many of the discussions at international level.
I mean, bottom line is most of the public understand that communication is vital. And as far as I understood it, the British embassy was particularly vital for communication between the United States and Iran.
That is true, and that is probably the clue as to why it was ransacked in the way that it was. Because there will be forces in Iran who think that actually isolation is not a bad thing, and that having no dialogue enables them to carry on with maintaining the control in the country, but also to keeping whatever program it is that they are endeavouring to pursue. Having Britain's presence on the ground, ability to have the force of European Union behind it, as you say also, as well as America's closest ally, does mean that there was this channel of communication open between the Iranian side and the West in general, and that has now been severed.
And it seems that immediately the sort of noises we're hearing from, at this stage, analysts in Israel is that this is a step closer to confrontation that Israel is certainly ready for.
I wouldn't jump the gun that quickly on the question of confrontation. I think this diplomatic round has still got quite a way to run. In the past, when such events have happened, you may recall Rushdie affair, for example, where Britain and Iran did sever relations, and European partners did respond in kind in support of Britain. Soon after, Germany, France and other countries began to reach out and restore some semblance of normalcy in terms of diplomatic relations. I think this time around too, as the dust settles, you will find both parties would want to re-engage at maybe lower level, but re-engage rather than see this escalate into open warfare. And of course, both Iran and the West in general and Europe in particular are mindful of Israel's grave concerns about Iran's nuclear program. And the last thing the West wants to be seen to be doing is having no contact whatsoever with Iran that would really agitate Israel into taking some action.
Is there still, though, a danger, Professor, that whilst this process, which could be very predictable, of diplomatic relations breaking down, then gradually being built up again, that Israel's obsession with Iran could jump in too heavily into the picture?
That danger is always there. And it has been there for some time. There is this, if you like, this conflict clock which is ticking, and it was first 2010, 2011, and now it's set for any time during 2012, by which it is said that Iran will acquire the ability to build a nuclear weapon. Not build one, but acquire the ability. And that, if you like, is the threshold stage that everybody's worried about. And if Israeli planners, as they say they are worried about that stage being reached at some point in 2012, then obviously they'll be thinking about preventing that from happening. And if you put your months together, that gives us a very narrow period of time through which we reach some semblance of resolution of this matter.
What's your take on this, Professor Ehteshami? Do you think that the West's demonization of Iran just constantly puts the Ayatollahs and President Ahmadinejad in a kind of lose-lose situation where they have nothing to lose and therefore they can behave unpredictably and perhaps, to no one's advantage?
I think there is a grain of truth in what you say in terms of it seems to me that they've lost total confidence in the West's ability to play fair with them. The West, of course, has got very legitimate concerns about Iran's nuclear program, about human rights, about all sorts of issues to do with Afghanistan, with Iraq, with its neighbors and so on. So they are not free of guilt in this affair either. But nevertheless, from their perspective, they are concerned that actually bottom line Western interest, bottom line American interest is regime change. And so long as they have that perception, they will obviously do anything in their power to prolong the period in power, but also to prevent the tentacles of the West to spread far enough in Iran and around it to make that a reality. And the ways of doing that are, first, isolation, to put a distance between yourself and your enemies. Secondly, to build up your forces in such a fashion that they can then put pressure on your enemy. Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran's alliance with Syria here come to mind. But also, thirdly, to make sure that you've got a sufficiently robust and credible deterrence. That deterrence may not be nuclear weapons, but it could be the perception of Iran's ability to escalate to that level. But also, of course, Iran has very powerful range of long-range missiles, and it could deploy those with conventional warheads, and that would do enough damage, thank you very much, in the congested neighborhood that Iran is in.
Indeed. Professor Ehteshami, thanks very much indeed for talking to us tonight on Sky News. Pleasure talking to you.
Sounds good, but if the people are being impoverished, in the end they don't like it.
Well, I think that their advantage from the Iranian perspective, from the extremists within the structures, is that they're underwritten by this oil money. Imagine how bad it would be in that country if they didn't have oil. So whilst it's not as wealthy or economically dynamic as it could be, it is neither is it a basket case. There is an Iranian middle class, and it is managing to get by reasonably well. Now, of course, the idea of sanctions will be to put the squeeze on the regime to try to pressurize it into principally giving up its nuclear weapons program. But of course, as we saw in Iraq under Saddam Hussein, who survived more than a decade under very draconian sanctions and was able to emerge successfully from that. It took a military invasion to get rid of him, and I think that's what's really troubling to the Western powers. On the one hand, they want to impose sanctions. They hope it will have an effect, but the reality is that history's shown that it doesn't very often.
I suppose the obvious observation, Sam, is this, that if the sanctions on Iran start to bite and we really do have an oil blockade, that will absolutely increase the stakes for the security of our oil supply elsewhere, not to mention the value and the price of oil.
Well, I mean, I don't know what the markets are doing, but some smart money will be going onto oil futures, certainly in the short term, because of this threat itself. It's about 20% of Europe's oil comes from Iran, I understand. So that's a big amount of oil to get elsewhere. Now, the Saudis could be expected to increase their production very rapidly. They are very anti the regime in Tehran. There's both a traditional suspicion between the Persian and the Arab world, and then a combination, of course, add to that the Sunni-Shia split there, and they're right, of course, glaring at each other across the Gulf there. So the Saudis could step up oil production, but it would be not easy at all for Europe to sustain a blockade. And of course, there are always other buyers for oil. Even under Saddam's Iraq, he was able to smuggle significant amounts out. It would hurt the Iranian economy, but it wouldn't cripple it.
Right, Sam Carley, many thanks for joining us.